Hello and welcome. That was The Last Dance by St. Paul and the Broken Bones. And this is the Giant World of Baseball podcast, a podcast about international baseball and sometimes the San Francisco Giants. I'm your host, the Frilled Shark, or Jacob, if you please. In this episode, I'm joined by legendary sports broadcaster and the voice of international baseball himself, Tyler Maun. Thanks for making time to talk with me, Mr. Maun. It's really a dream come true. How's it going?
First off, don't feel the need to call me Mr. Mon. I'm the most non-deserving of a cool designation like that person that you'll talk to on the show. But no, man, this is great, Jacob. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I was like, would he agree to come on? I follow him. Maybe I'll just ask and he'll say yes. And, worst that people can say is no, right?
Absolutely, that's the right attitude to have.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say amazing job as always with the 2025 WBCQs. I watched every single game of both pools, which was a little bit painful, especially waking up early for some of the Taiwan games. But the Taipei pool was awesome. I'm a little annoyed Spain choked, but as a fan of European baseball, but I guess that, you know, the roster left a little bit to be desired, in my opinion. It happens. Baseball happens. Nicaragua and Taiwan played very well. And I was a little bit disappointed that you and Ryan Roland Smith weren't calling the Tucson pool. I don't know if there's like a broadcaster code of neutrality applying after the fact, but like I'm curious to hear your thoughts on both qualifier pools, if you're able to share them with me.
Yeah, man, it was we had such a good group in Taipei. I mean, it was such an interesting four team pool because you had this Chinese Taipei team that's coming in off of winning Premier 12 and kind of felt like they were just going to roll through everybody. We just figured they'd win, however they needed to win those first few days and they'd be on through and then all of a sudden that was just not the way that team came out and they looked really overwhelmed by the moment. And that wasn't entirely surprising given the way they built that roster for anybody who, didn't get a chance to tune in or didn't follow that storyline. They won Premier 12, which is essentially, the 1A version of the World Baseball Classic. It's a smaller field, doesn't include major league players, at least American major league players. But they beat all of the best teams in that tournament that they needed to, and they knocked off Japan in the global championship final. And they had a team that was just loaded with stars, CPBL stars, and guys who have been in those big moments before and came through in big moments. And then for the World Baseball Classic, the CTBA, the Chinese Taipei Baseball Association, they kind of gambled. They put together a really, really young roster with the idea that they could get rest for the players who had played in November in Premier 12. And if you go in and you take care of your business, then all of a sudden you've essentially got two full rosters of guys with very high level international experience to draw on in 2026. But they almost didn't make it. And I mean, that would have been the biggest storyline sports wise in Taiwan. And I don't even know how long if they would have failed to advance out of that qualifier. But they were there obviously as much momentum as anybody in international baseball had. Nicaragua, a team that played really well in the qualifiers a few years ago in Panama, they were the ones who looked best out of everybody, just so complete, pitching wise, defense wise. Spain was outstanding the first few days, and then South Africa, a squad that by the by the end, I think had run out of juice, but they were, tied in extra innings. They were leading Nicaragua on the first day and then tied in extra innings, ended up losing in a walk-off. If South Africa pulls out that game on day one, we're looking at a much more competitive four-team field. All of a sudden, South Africa might have had the inside track to advance beyond Taipei. So, that was it was a really good group. The second group, the group in Tucson, obviously there seemed to be less parity there. I think, with how China ran out of arms really quickly, that spelled doom for them. But Brazil put together a really good roster. Germany had a really good group as well. The ability to have the qualifiers in the States, for at least, and I didn't mention Colombia, obviously Colombia doing what they did to get through that group. You sort of felt like they were going to be the team that rolled through, just with their experience and the talent level that they had on that roster. The ability to have that group in the States, I think, provided an opportunity for certain players to be involved who might not have been involved otherwise. Obviously, the environment was going to be completely different. Not playing in a stadium where, even in games that didn't involve the home team, in Taipei, we still had fantastic crowds for those games between, even a game between Nicaragua and South Africa, where you're not going to have a lot of Nicaraguan or South African fans in the house. We still had really good crowds turn out because they were the day game and fans wanted to get in, watch some baseball before the night game, when Chinese Taipei was playing. So, the atmosphere was going to be way different in Tucson, and that was pretty obvious. But it was good baseball, and it was really good to see what Colombia and Brazil brought out, for those games, and having those two teams in is going to be really important for next year.
Yeah, I think Taiwan just like loves international baseball. I remember like 2023 in that the pool you and Ryan called, like that Netherlands Cuba game, like there were just like a bunch of school kids who got to field trip out to the game to watch the Tom DeBlock masterclass, and get educated by the best in the business. And the atmosphere there is always so awesome, which is I'm a little disappointed they weren't going to be like, oh, if Taiwan qualifies, like we'll have Taiwan back again to host again for the main tournament. But like, nothing's guaranteed except death and taxes in life. So like, I suppose you couldn't really get away with doing that. I, as a huge Germany fan, like you can see the German flag
Yeah,
on my wall there. My family is all German. I was a little bit disappointed by the German roster. I felt like Jendrik, might have seen what the Czech Republic did and was like, oh yeah, that's definitely going to work. But he had to play two teams, one team that was way better than any of the teams they faced in the 2022 qualifier, and then a Brazil team with a lot of affiliated talent. And Germany, the only affiliated talent they had was Yannick Walter, who had never played above the Arizona Complex League. Shout out to him. He has like a 900 OPS in like 2 games in single A this year already. But it was a bit tough. Like no Aaron Altair, no Demetrius Moore. It was hosted in Arizona, but Max Kepler nowhere to be found. Brendan Donovan nowhere to be found. Kind of sunk them. And that game they lost against Brazil at the end, like it was just kind of one of those games where like baseball is baseball. Every single hard hit ball they hit was finding a glove. Pretty much, it felt like. Nicolas Rimmel pitched a lot better than his line indicated, I thought, but just like every single ball put in play was like 70-mile-per-hour squibber that got mishandled or got booted, and Brazil was just keeping the pressure up. So you know, I'm interested to see who Brazil is able to get and add in the 2026 WBC. Not going to sugarcoat it. I think they're going to have a hard time in the Houston pool, especially with no Thiago Vieira. He's out due to injury, and Jan Gomes seemingly retiring and not wanting anything to do with baseball anymore. It seems like. I don't know if they'll be able to like talk him into unretiring just this once. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see Nicaragua, very fundamentally sound. I'm really excited to see what Taiwan's going to look like. Like, can they get a Corbin Carroll and a Stuart Fairchild in addition to like all their best performers from the Premier 12 WBC qualifiers? Like, they could be them in Colombia kind of like dark horse could make it out of their pools. I think.
yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And like you said, it's the there is not a one specific pool of death. I don't think. There might be one that is more the pool of death than one or two others. I think you look at Pool B where the United States is, and that's the easier pool. The U.S. I think has a 95% chance of advancing based on some of the stuff that I saw yesterday. The top two teams from each pool will advance to the quarterfinal round. The U.S. is in its group with Mexico, Italy, Great Britain, and a Brazil team. But you look around the other pools, it's a lot is going to depend on what these rosters look like, like you said. And we know that Japan's not going to finish outside of the top two in a group that they host in Tokyo. So then you look at Australia, Korea, Czechia, and Chinese Taipei as playing for one spot behind Japan in Pool C. Pool D, that Nicaragua team has to go up against Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, the Netherlands, and Israel. None of those teams are slouches. In Pool A, which will be played in Puerto Rico, is Puerto Rico, Cuba, Canada, Panama, and Colombia. And I mean, any of those teams could surprise you too. So there really is not a single group that you look at and think, oh, that's the one that you definitely want to be in.
No.
But to go back to what you're saying about Germany, it's so interesting because we were essentially 1 or 2 games away from having an all-time European field in the WBC because
Yeah.
had Spain qualified, had Germany qualified, you've got Czechia in there, you've got Great Britain in there. There would have been, in addition to obviously the Netherlands and what they've done, making a semifinal a few WBCs ago, there would have been the potential for, and Italy being a stalwart also, for, up to 6 teams coming from Europe, which would have been an all-time most. The balance, you mentioned what Germany tried to do this year, looking at what the Czech Republic did to qualify in 2022. The balance is always, we want to build this talent locally. We want to have local guys come through, but can you sacrifice some of your experience, maybe more tangentially connected baseball lines? How do you strike that balance between your local guys and the guys who might be a little bit more ready for that bigger stage, right? And that's a tough thing to do. And the Czechs, they've wagered a lot on that, and it worked out for them. I think that's the way that, personally, I would love to see teams going forward, but obviously that's a struggle sometimes to find a roster that's going to be able to compete on those levels while being entirely comprised of local guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like a testament to how the WEC has progressed so much, where like we're getting to this point where like, the parity is looking really like it's looking like there's a lot of parity. So like, is that an indicator that maybe the tournament's going to expand next time? I don't know, because like, I think Spain, if Spain had qualified, if Germany had qualified and they gotten there like some additions come WBC, like they'd be able to hang with the big boys. Like, if you give Spain Emil Morales, who crazy Dodgers prospect, should have been on that team, people said, oh, he's not ready. But, the Dodgers invited him to spring breakout, which, says a lot about him coming out of the DSL, I think. He would be a spark plug for them. They could get like a Yeri Perez, who's a Royals farmhand. Peter Bonilla, Dodgers farmhand. Of course, Pete Alonso is eligible. He's probably kind of at the point where he's going to be riding the Team USA bench. So if he felt like playing for them, he could be a star. And they'd have been able to hang. So hopefully they expand the qualifiers. With Germany specifically, it was a little tough because some of their like really exciting talent were all like DSL guys. Like the best pitcher in the DSL last year was German. Cesar Aquino, 5.5K per PB in the DSL, which, a little bit of a crapshoot, but that's pretty good. Alessandro De La Cruz, NL All-Star in the DSL, like 950 OPS for your Colorado Rockies in the DSL, born in Berlin. He didn't make the team either, so I don't know. Come a couple years, we'll see what it's like. But
And that's the
yeah,
thing, like if you can get these guys and bring them along and keep them playing games on a regular basis and getting that regular workload, that's important because I think one thing that we find, especially South Africa is kind of the easiest team to point out in this sort of conversation, but the lack of full seasons of work against high quality competition just shows up. And, I've worked so many of these international events that by the end of, we do 10-day World Cups in the youth levels and, the U18, U15, U23 classifications. When we get to the end of a 10-day event, South Africa is as good as any team out there. The problem is for the first 5 days, they're kind of getting kicked around a little bit because you're facing velocity that you haven't seen on a regular basis. The defensive work is not as crisp as it is when you're playing every single day. So that's so much of the game is, if you can keep these guys in affiliated ball, I know the now renamed Bundesliga, the DBL is expanding and doing a lot of things to continue its growth and playing regularly and doing all that type of stuff. That is huge in being able to build a talent base that you can pick from to have these rosters and have them be successful.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really excited for the U18 baseball World Cup this year. I think Germany might have a really good showing. Tom Apfelbaum is a 16-year-old pitching in the DBL, touches 92. So, that's kind of Ben Crouvier levels of, European prospect type, I think. So we'll see how they do. But let's switch gears a little bit and go back in time. So you're from Denver. You're a very outspoken Denver sports fan. I was very fortunate to get to, I lived in Pueblo, Colorado for about 4 or 5 months, which, I think you know why I did. I try to keep my real life job and my hobby separate, but you know why I was there. So I got to go out to Coors, spend a little bit of time of Denver, great city, great stadium. I know like the Broncos and Nuggets they've both been around for a while, but the Rockies are fairly new. And also from your website, I see that you received and I quote here, people don't think I'm being mean to Mr. Maun here. Tyler likes to talk too much in class evaluation from every teacher you've had, which, I'm pretty sure I got the same thing on some of my report cards. But I have a two-part question, which was, did you always want to be a sports broadcaster growing up? And how did your upbringing in that Denver sports environment, maybe like a little bit less baseball heavy, kind of ultimately affect your pursuit of becoming a broadcaster?
And those are two great questions. I did always want to do this, which is very cool. I think when I was a kid, just like any other kid, I felt like, well, I'll just play a sport for a living. That's we're all gonna get there. And then I think you realize, once you encounter your physique and your athletic limitations, when you get a little bit older, you realize, all right, maybe that's not gonna work. But yeah, there was just always something about the mechanics of being involved in a game and talking about a game and relaying the stories of a game that appealed to me. And my dad still has a tape recorder that has me, broadcasting quote unquote games of Tecmo Super Bowl on the original Nintendo back when I was like 6 years old. Something that I just was always, always, always interested in. And it is interesting having grown up being such a baseball guy in what for a very long time was, really only a football city. I mean, Denver did have the Nuggets and had a good fan base for the Nuggets when I was a kid, but Denver was a Broncos city and a Broncos city only, really until the Rockies came around. And Denver has, it's a bummer now because Denver is kind of a punchline for people baseball wise because of the Rockies. Denver has an amazing baseball history. Denver, people don't really know the history of Denver in terms of what it meant before its big league era to baseball, but Denver used to be the host site for what they called the Little World Series of the West, which was the Denver Post baseball tournament back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And that tournament was integrated in 1934. The Kansas City Monarchs came out and played in the Denver Post tournament, which was, a competition that was not the major leagues, but was not that far off from being the major leagues with the level of talent that played in that event year after year. Um, you know, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and the famous barnstorming teams of the era went through Denver on a regular basis, and there was so much talent that came out of Denver in terms of players who stopped there in their professional careers. There's a really proud baseball history there, and for whatever reason, even though the Broncos were my first love and I was a football kid for sure. When we got the Rockies, I was at such a good age to be swept up and mesmerized by something that was that new and that exciting. I was 7 years old when I was there, behind home plate in the upper deck at Mile High Stadium on opening day when Eric Young hit a leadoff home run for the Rockies. And you just kind of felt like, oh, this will never disappoint me. This will be the coolest thing in the world forever. And maybe not the case with the Rockies, but it's still been the case with baseball for me. And my parents, my mom, born and raised in East Harlem in New York, and grew up in the 50s and 60s when the Yankees were winning World Series every other year. And my dad is a Midwest guy, but always grew up loving baseball. Would tell me stories about falling asleep at night listening to the Cardinals or the Cubs or the Reds or whoever he could get on a little radio in his room. And yeah, so it's coming from a very football centric place. I do love football, but there was just something about baseball that always spoke to me. And it was the sport that I always played. It was the thing that I always loved to watch. And it just kind of became part of me that way.
That's awesome. I love like learning about like the further back history of baseball. Like I love like I'm literally wearing an Oakland Oaks shirt right
Amazing.
here.
Amazing.
So I'm from the Bay Area originally, but like San Francisco Seals, Oakland Oaks, PCL, San Francisco Missions. I love all that history, and I didn't know that about Denver. Like that's
Yeah.
awesome. There's
And a
so
lot
many
of people
great.
don't, I mean, and I think the vast majority of people in Denver don't. And that's very unfortunate. I think there could be a lot more done. To be frank, I think the Rockies could do a lot more to highlight the fact that there's been a lot of really incredible baseball stories in Denver and in the Rocky Mountain area prior to 1993. I think that's been something that's been very lightly explored, and the vast majority of baseball fans don't know that. But I'm the same way. I mean, the one of the things that I think has always appealed to me about baseball, I'm kind of a history nerd anyway, and so a sport that has that much history and has that many characters and that many moments that tie into the progression of American society. I think that stuff is all interesting. And to tie it back to the international stuff, I think you learn a lot about international diplomacy and the way that the world has expanded and contracted because of the way that baseball has covered the globe. And so that's really interesting too, to kind of see a lot of stuff in the world through that lens.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the Field of Dreams quote? America's marched on like an army of steamrollers, but baseball's marked the times. I joke that like 75% of the like cocktail party factoids I learn are from international baseball. Like, where's the biggest population of Japanese people living outside of Japan? It's not Hawaii,
Exactly.
it's not California, it's
It's
Brazil.
Brazil.
Yeah, I also learned that there's this really funny. So in Japan, they have a lot of there's some Portuguese influence because Portugal, the Dutch, were some of the few people allowed to bring in things to Japan when they're closed off. So they brought like Castella cake to Japan, but then this Castella cake made its way to Brazil. Not via the Portuguese Empire, but because the Japanese immigrants to Brazil from Japan brought it. So from one Portuguese colony to another, or from one Portuguese part of their empire to another, kind of it found its way to Brazil, which is
That's amazing.
amazing, and something I only know because of international, like through international baseball and talking with Brazilian, Japanese baseball fans.
I remember reading a story a long time ago about how baseball bats were very difficult to come by in Brazil in the early days of playing baseball there. And so they experimented with all these different potential baseball bat concoctions. And one of them was trying to figure out if rubber trees could be made into baseball bats. And that didn't really work very well. And yeah, so all of those things that, are little elements of the way a game spreads that you would never think about, and then you think, oh yeah, that societally, I mean, that's you can use that as a microcosm of a lot of other things in the way that the world becomes globalized as well.
Yeah, I have a very close Dutch friend who she studied abroad at UC Davis, which is where I went to school. But I would have ever saw myself talking to a Dutch person about like the politics and ethical questions and moral questions about the Dutch Caribbean and their independence and everything, unless it was for international baseball. So yeah, I think it's enriching for all of us international baseball fans. But Continuing on, I read that you began your broadcasting career with University of Denver Athletics in 2008. So, how do you actually wind up getting started broadcasting? And did you have like any mentors who like helped you once you started kind of like refine your craft and get point out the do's and don'ts and everything?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, like looking back that far. So my first job out of college was with a radio station back home in Denver. I attended the University of Nebraska, moved back home to Denver, got a job with a sports radio station there, and I did start doing stuff with the University of Denver as a basically as a producer at first, and then kind of worked my way into doing some on-air stuff. So I would run the production element of basketball and hockey broadcasts, and then I would do the halftime shows, or the intermission shows for hockey, pregame and postgame stuff, all of that. I ended up moving from being the producer of the morning show at this radio station to hosting the morning show when the previous host left for a play-by-play job in the major leagues, and that was Tim Neverett, who's now one of the Dodgers voices. Tim left for a job with the Pirates for a little while, and then with the Red Sox, and now is one of the Dodgers guys. And working in radio was really cool. I got to do stuff around all of the teams that I grew up cheering for, being credentialed to cover the Broncos and the Rockies and the Nuggets and the Avalanche, and that was really great. But it wasn't what I wanted to do ultimately. I wanted to do play by play, and so I applied for a minor league baseball job in early 2009, and I got that one. I was very lucky. I got the first minor league job that I applied for, and I moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I was the radio voice for what was then a Braves affiliate for 2009, 2010, and then was a Rangers affiliate my last season there in 2011. 2012, I worked in Double A in the Pirates organization in Altoona. And kind of in the midst of all of that was where I started my international stuff. The off season of 2010 to 2011, I moved to Australia, and I helped MLB launch the Australian Baseball League. I was the media director for the team in Sydney for our first season, and that was the coolest experience of my life. Living overseas for 6 months or so, and being able to be part of something like that on the ground floor was just such a cool thing to get a chance to experience. And I had always been really interested in, I wanted to live abroad at some point in my life. I wanted to, all I really enjoy in life are traveling and sports and food, and to be able to somehow mix all of those was was the coolest thing. And so that's what opened the door on the international side for me. But yeah, I mean, you just kind of you learn and grow, and you do, you come across people that you bounce stuff off of and you learn from. And one of my mentors throughout, a guy who I've always said is sort of the only reason why I've ever been successful in anything media wise, who's still one of my best friends, is the host of the afternoon drive show on the Nuggets and Avalanche flagship station in Denver. His name is Nate Kreckman. And Nate was kind of the guy who took me under his wing and showed me how to do anything when I first got started in radio. And yeah, you take these little pieces of every job that you've worked, and you try to mold them into, the person that you want to become, as a broadcaster or as a producer, or as whatever you end up doing. And so yeah, I got all of that stuff, and luckily I, somehow was able to open this international door as well. And it's, taken me a lot of places that I never ever would have considered in my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. You totally just, I had a whole thing prepared about your ABL, your time with the ABL. So you already covered that. I'm going to throw that one out the window. I used to follow the ABL really, really closely. Like I watched every Tuatara game. Like I was like, oh, this is so cool baseball in New Zealand. And it's gone.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think I watched every single one of Dylan Unsworth's starts when he won the pitcher of the year back. I think it was it 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
Um, he's a guy who's, one of my favorite international players to watch whenever he's on the field.
And he's still doing it.
Yeah,
Still
he's
doing it
still doing
somehow.
it. He's entering that Chiron Martis Unk still got it kind of area of skill. Marcus Solbach also, like, the big germ Helms Award winner. I highly recommend anyone who, has the time and bandwidth to watch like ABL games. I really need to be doing a better job getting back into it because like you see so many awesome prospects like Hyung Chung go absolutely like ballistic nutso in the ABL, and even Carlos Colmenares, Team Spain legend, had a nice little ABL season, I think, recently.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of amazing to think about, when we started in the league, this is, our opening game was I think November 2nd of 2010. So the fact the league is coming up on 15 years is insane to me. But it was just such a different looking and feeling league at that time. It was, the first time that MLB had really done anything like that, launching a league overseas, and the league was centrally owned. MLB had the controlling share of it. In tandem with what was then the Australian Baseball Federation, now is Baseball Australia. And as things grew and evolved over time, the teams were individually owned now. They did expand. They had Auckland. They had a team known as Geelong Korea, which was a team of all KBO prospects um, who were sent down to play over their off seasons. And those two teams have gone away. So they went from 6 teams to 8 teams. They're back to six now. Um, Baseball is always going to be not even a second tier sport in Australia. I think it's probably more a third or fourth tier sport, but they have found their niche and they've done a really good job in sustaining themselves. I think the fact that they have had so much talent come through there. Ronald Acuna was there when he was a really young prospect coming up. There's been some really big, Didi Gregorius was there that first season that I was there. He was with the Canberra Cavalry in the first game that we ever played in the ABL. Didi was in that lineup. So that has been really cool. I think the thing that's going to help the ABL most is Travis Bazzana, having the first overall pick in the MLB draft coming from Australia and doing it in sort of a unique way to be a guy who grew up, and played a high level of baseball in Australia as a kid, then jumps into, arguably the greatest college baseball program in America and turns himself into a first overall draft pick. I mean, that to pave that pathway shows young athletes that that is something that is possible for them. I worked for the ABL for 5 years after that inaugural season from the States. I worked for them remotely and kind of ran the websites and did media relations and wrote game stories and profiles and all that type of stuff. And so seeing the way that the league has evolved over time has been really fascinating. But it's cool because I think there were a lot of people that first season who thought, oh, this league will never make it 5 years. And here they are 15 years later and they're still going strong.
Yeah, like seeing that grassroots level and like bringing that level of play up helps so much with like, guys like Todd Van Steensel, Tim Kennelly, like you see them, they're still on the international stage being effective, and they play all like they're not affiliated players. They play all their ball in Australia, but they're facing the Hung Chen of the world, and doing their best. And I remember like very distinctly, I was in high school in the UK watching like Australia versus Cuba in the 2017 WBC, and John Deeble. There was a quote from John Deeble who's like, all we need to do is get more Australians into universities in the USA playing D1 baseball. And when that happens, Australian baseball is going to blow up. Look where we are now. I mean, first of all, it makes me feel really old because that was like 8 years ago. um, but that's super cool to see. And who does John Deeble work for? He works for the Dodgers. What's a trend with the Dodgers? They're very forward thinking. They hire the best people. Like, I don't know, maybe there's some trends there looking at who they bring in. But
And it's
yeah.
interesting because you've mentioned Ryan Roland Smith, who I've worked with on so many of these international broadcasts, and Ryan helps out with a lot of those guys, getting them into universities in the U.S., getting them, in front of the eyes of college coaches, because it used to just be Australian players would grow up, they'd find a scout who was interested in them, at 14, 15, 16 years old. They'd sign for a little bit of money, go play professionally. Likely it wasn't going to work out, and then that was that. And all of a sudden you end up back home and you're 20 years old, and maybe you worked through to the point of getting your high school diploma, but you haven't gone through job training, you didn't go to university, and you find yourself sort of lost in these circumstances in life where you're on a detoured track that didn't take you, where necessarily you might thought you were going to reach as an athlete. But now maybe you don't have the skills that you were hoping to have doing anything else. And so this does feel like it's a marriage of a lot of really good things because they can develop that young talent in Australia. That's been proven that finishing school of whether it's going to a JUCO or a smaller college or university, maybe being able to make the jump to play at the Division I level. Obviously, we mentioned Travis Bazana, the Nati brothers who have played at the Division I level. Jimmy, I believe, is the one who is at Stanford right now. Those guys have, I think, showcased that not only does this college thing work, but it can serve as a jumping off point for whether it's, being a high level draft pick. I don't think we can bank on a whole lot of 1-1 picks for any structure necessarily. It's not quite as simple as, we get these Aussie kids in, they're all going to be first round picks. But, Travis Bazana showing what the ceiling of that can be. There is so much to be said for that as the next step for players from non-traditional places. And I think the model that the Australian baseball structure has put together is similar to what the Czech structure has put together as well. And other countries really, I think, can look at that, Germany being a perfect example of, okay, well, if we can't get these guys a ton of innings here, and we don't feel necessarily like they're ready to sign professionally, find them a college spot. And obviously there's so much going on with how college baseball is governed nowadays, and that's a whole separate conversation with college athletics in the US. But there are those next steps where I think athletes from non-traditional baseball places are finding ways forward where they can continue developing in really positive directions.
Yeah, totally. I mean, wasn't like there's a whole like subplot of the Moneyball movie where Billy Bean's like, man, I really wish I had taken that full ride to Stanford because like, I would have gotten a degree and, had some time to figure things out. And that's I'm sure a large part of it is like being able to kind of, you know, play and figure it out if you're not immediately successful. Like you look at a guy at the University of Houston for Germany, Paul Schmitz, who he came over as a reliever. He had a great first year as a reliever. He struggled in his second year as a reliever. His third year now, he's a starter and he's finding a little bit more success. And success as a starter, definitely you're going to get more teams interested than, success as a reliever in general. So I'd love to see that more with European countries, especially. I think we're getting there. Like France definitely has that right idea. Like you look at Mathis Mirant. Last I checked,
Yes.
he was holding his own at D1. Mathis Neiral was basically like the best JUCO pitcher last year, and he's going D1. And it's crazy to me that Ben Couvert like shoved it against two like senior level national teams in 2023 at the European Championships, and he gets relegated to JUCO because of how like scholarships work, and he had like a minor elbow issue. But like Eduardo Corneli was, I think he was the third highest ranked European prospect coming out of Italy in 2024. I think he's going to Nebraska actually. I want to say. Um, but yeah, it's college baseball. It's always fun, good to see. Love seeing guys get more and more into those programs. There's this one college, Arizona Western. It's a JUCO. I think that like 90% of their team is like people from random friggin' countries all over the place. Like they have Dan Kawanishi, who's Austrian. They have Spanish baseball players from Spain. It's great. So I
And it is
love.
interesting because so many of those JUCOs, Western Oklahoma, for example, was so tied in with Netherlands prospects for a long time because there are always those random coaching connections where somebody worked with somebody at one stop. That person might get hired as an assistant, where someone else goes home and they're working for a federation and say, hey, do you have a spot at your school for this guy? And I find that really cool. You mentioned Ben Cruver going the JUCO route. He's a coach. He's college in Arizona. That's another place that is just a powerhouse as far as churning out Division I talent. And for so many of those guys, there are these opportunities that come from being in places where you know you're going to have a lot of eyes on you. And even if you didn't land in your dream spot year number one, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean you can end up for a year at Cochise College and then be at LSU, you know, your sophomore year. And there is so much nowadays where even, you know, 15 years ago, you could go to a JUCO and maybe never be seen again. Nowadays, more than likely, your games are available to be watched, whether it's by Division One coaches. It could also be, you know, if you want to get signed and play professionally for a team in the Mexican League, or if you have the opportunity to go play in a winter ball circuit somewhere. So much of those doorways have opened because of the readily available nature of games and of film now, and that's great because there's a lot of talent now that doesn't slip through the cracks because of that.
Yeah, like to me, like I think of Ethan Buckley immediately. He was like a JUCO catcher for South Africa now. I think I haven't checked to see how he's doing this year, but he's going to Gonzaga, I think, for D1. So yeah, that's awesome to see. Okay, let's refocus a little bit on younger you. So I, as a child of the like late aughts, early 2010s, I was very lucky. Like I've never, as far as I can remember, the WBC has always been there for me in terms of international baseball. But you, as someone who's more wizened in the ways of the world, to put it politely, I guess, I'm sure you remember a time where before 2006, before the WBC was a thing. How like what was your first real exposure to international baseball? Was it like the Olympics or like I don't know, one of those like random like they have the baseball World Cup. I think that's where like the Netherlands won one year, and that's where Didi got his knighthood. So like what was your real first experience to
Yeah,
international baseball?
I mean, it's funny because I don't have like the specific like, oh, that was this event at this time, but I know it was the Olympics. It was either, you know, 92 in Barcelona or 96 in Atlanta. When I first, I think, encountered, oh man, they play baseball other places. Like growing up, you know that there are players from other places, but you don't really think about things in the context of, oh, there are entire communities built around this sport elsewhere. You know, and being somebody who as a kid, I was just fascinated by the rest of the world, you know, watching the opening ceremonies at the Olympics just to see what other countries' flags looked like. Or like, why is this country so good at this sport and this country is so good at this sport? That always interested me. And so to see the way baseball was fascinated me, I think more than anything else, because I'm very much a visual person in terms of the aesthetics of sports. And I'm a huge logo and uniform nerd. Obviously, you and I were talking before we started recording about my wall of hats that I've just wasted thousands of dollars on over the year. You know, because to me, a logo, a uniform, all of that, it tells the story of who you are. And so to see, you know, the way these other countries came out, prepared to play a game of baseball was so cool to me because it was such a different um, visual package than just flipping on a random, you know, Reds Cardinals game in July. And so, you know, I remember one of my earliest memories was seeing Cuba playing in the all red uniforms. I'm thinking like you can play baseball in red pants? That's not something that I had ever considered before. You know, the mystique of those Cuban teams when I was a kid, when they Cuba from the 1950s through the middle part of the 2000s won either gold or silver at every major international baseball event for over 50 years. And it was a time when they came in with these all-star teams. You had no idea who any of the guys were. Maybe you had heard a rumor about them somewhere. You know, you would at that time you had read some sort of snippet in Baseball America about, oh, this pitcher that Cuba supposedly has. But you didn't know anything about these guys. And, you know, at that time, they didn't defect either. You know, it wasn't until the 90s really that that started to be a thing. The Hernandez brothers and you know, making those jumps and becoming such integral parts of World Series championship teams. Um, So that I think is what first hooked me, was seeing these other countries and just the way everything looked on a baseball diamond. But the other thing I think from the baseball standpoint that hooked me is how differently you look at the game of baseball. And if you are, I don't want to say an uneducated observer, but if you're somebody who doesn't really know a lot about baseball, you just look at it and think, oh, well, that's the way you play that sport. But when you're somebody who is a nerd who's into it, you realize that baseball can be played in so many different ways. And the way that a Japanese team plays is different from how a Korean team plays, or a Taiwanese team plays, or an Australian team, or a Latin American team, whatever it is. And I don't think the average person realizes that. Some of that, to an extent, has been watered down these days. It's not quite the same. It used to be we would go into any international event, and you know that if Japan gets a leadoff base runner on, no matter where they are in the lineup, they're going to bunt that guy over. That's not always the case anymore, but there are still stylistically such obvious differences between all of these teams and all these countries, and that fascinated me. And that was one of the things that I latched onto earliest. When they dropped baseball from the Olympics, the U.S. winning gold in 2000. I thought Ben Sheets was going to be the greatest pitcher in the history of humankind. Not a very good career, but Ben Sheets, being able to be a hero for the U.S. in Sydney. And then in 2004, when it was, I believe it was '04, when they announced that baseball was not going to be back after 2008. That was I was really bummed about that. And Major League Baseball stepped up to fill that void with the World Baseball Classic. And before I even knew what the WBC was going to be, I knew that I wanted to witness it. And as details started to come out about it, and I was a college student, and made plans with my friend. I played club baseball at the University of Nebraska, and me and some of my club ball friends made a plan to go to the first WBC. It was going to be over our spring break, and my best friend in college is from San Diego, so we traveled to San Diego, and we were there at the beginning of our trip. We went up to Anaheim. We caught a U.S. Korea game at Angel Stadium in Anaheim. Then we drove to Phoenix and Tucson. We did a few days of spring training games. And then we went back to San Diego for the semifinal games and the championship game. And it was just, I was hooked, man. I mean, from that the game that we went to, the U.S. Korea game that we went to at Angel Stadium, was maybe 20,000 people, mostly Korea fans. It was not some, you hear the experiences of people who go to their first FIFA World Cup game or their first European soccer match. It was not that, but it still hooked me immediately. And then being able to go watch the semifinal games and the final at Petco Park, I was in. And after that, it was just something that we made a point on our calendar to hit. We went to 2009, Dodger Stadium. We went to 2013, that weird classic in San Francisco where the weather wasn't great, but the DR team was loaded. And, then the 17 classic, being able to be there for the U 2017. Um, yeah, it's just something that for whatever reason, just latched onto. And I guess it was right place, right time to be somebody who fell in love with an event like that, because I've gotten to see it grow up. And, now it is very weird for me to hear, young players talk nowadays about, oh, well, I've been watching the WBC since I was a kid. And to think about, like, oh yeah, these are guys who grew up with this. This was something that was new and unique and was a gamble for Major League Baseball when it first came around. Now it's just a thing that's on the sports calendar for young baseball fans. And that's awesome to me, because there were a lot of different times when MLB could have pulled the plug on it. And the fact that they didn't, and they stuck with it, and now it has become a thing that is cemented onto the sports landscape for fans, I think is huge. And I think that's something that Major League Baseball is just now beginning to reap the rewards of.
Yeah, for sure. Talking about style, like I highly recommend everyone at home look up the uniforms from like the 92 through 2008 Olympics. I don't know who was like, they had some crazy sauce, some of those team uniforms. Like, it's funny because like you see like 2004, 2008, like the uniforms at the WBC versus the Olympics, they're like totally different for some reason. Like
Yeah.
Japan had like the gray spaced out pinstripes. Like the Netherlands in 2004 had this like Fred Flintstones looking ass font on their uniforms, opposed to like the black and orange in 2006 with the classic Netherlands like lettering. It's crazy. And I highly recommend looking up pictures of them because they're super cool.
And it is
Um,
so funny because it is a it's a declaration of, who you are and who your federation is. But I think it also sort of showcases the growth. When you look at what the Netherlands outfit is now, from not just the in-game uniforms, but the fashion stuff that they put out these days, the Kingdom of the Netherlands apparel, like you build so much of your identity from the outside in nowadays versus how it used to be. And when you look that level of good and you look that level of professional, I think people take notice of, oh, this is an organization that has things on the right track. And there's a lot of that with how teams look and how teams put themselves together for these events. And that was one of the most heavily discussed things in 2023. It was the first time that MLB had not had all of the uniforms made for the Classic via Majestic. And so, teams were in charge of their own uniforms. And, Italy's is my favorite example because they went to Area, a soccer uniform or apparel manufacturer, and they said, we need baseball uniforms. And Area said, well, we don't really do that. We can give it a crack. And so they worked with a local company and came up with their uniforms. I think that's awesome. So yeah, it's very cool. I mean, the evolution of that stuff is fascinating to me.
Yeah, like I feel like the 2006, 2009 uniforms, like I feel like they were all like stitched on. They all looked really good. 2013, 2017, it was weird because like everyone was using this template basically, just like with the colors changed.
Yeah.
2017, I thought a lot of them looked really bad. Like the gray was like way too dark. Like Puerto Rico, you couldn't see the text because it was just
Yeah, it was like that slate graphite colored gray. Yeah, I'm with you. It's like the my alma mater, the University of Nebraska this year has these Adidas Road grays that are almost black, and I think it's atrocious. And so yeah, it is like, and I asked Ryan Roland Smith about this, in our Taipei qualifier games back in February, and he said, yeah, it was interesting having everybody have those same templates. But the one thing that it did do was it made everybody feel like a big leaguer. The fact that you had that major league template, the major league manufactured uniform, you're playing on that stage. It's like, oh, I've arrived. And for some guys who, never played again after a classic, that's a very cool thing that they got to take with them.
yeah, absolutely. And I love like when they branched out more in 2023, let teams handle their own uniforms. That had some really high highs, like obviously the Netherlands. It also had some really low lows. I think there needs to maybe be a little bit of regulation in terms of like what the
Yeah,
uniform, like I think
I would
I
agree.
really
You can't
I
have heat
hate.
press letters falling off in the middle of games, Great Britain.
No, you can't. And I hate printed uniforms. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine, which is like I look at the
Same.
Australian one
Same
and I'm
here.
like yeah, the I love the Aboriginal like design. That's so cool, but like it's all printed on. It looks kind of terrible if I'm being frank, like in terms of print
Yeah,
quality.
it just has a cheaper look, I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And yeah, so I think that's my hope. There will be sort of a standard of manufacturing quality. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm 100% for like all these interesting like domestic styles as just as long as they're all like sewn on and like major league quality. Yeah, but that's always great. Um, let's on to our next little topic here. I'm always like you've been doing this for such a long time. I'm always like so pleasantly surprised whenever I'm doing research or pulling tape for something, like I'm doing like a project and I hear your voice. Like for instance, I always think of like the Netherlands versus Dominican 2021 Olympic qualifier. Which memory check, can you name the two starting pitchers from that game?
Oh man. Uh no, I don't think I can.
It was
I
Tom
don't think I can.
DeBlock.
I was gonna guess Tom DeBlanc.
Tom DeBlock versus Osvaldo Bido, Oakland A's
Wow.
legend. Yeah.
Yeah, I would not have remembered Osvaldo Beto.
Yeah, I just like I was like because I was trying to pull tape for Tom DeBlock and R.A. Franson from that game, and I just see like Osvaldo Beto like pumping like 96, 97. I was like, holy that's Osvaldo Beto. Like he's a major leaguer right now. Um, but my question is, so you've called a lot of games at a lot of different competitions at different levels of youth versus senior, and I gotta wonder, what's your favorite one that you've called and why?
Man, that is such a great question. I don't know if I can pick a single favorite one, but I do have favorite moments throughout all of these. And honestly, um, seeing Chinese Taipei win that qualifier in February was very, very cool. Being able to watch those fans celebrate the way they did because they got to do it at home in a sold out stadium with each other. And that was really cool. When they won in Tokyo and they won Premier 12 in November, that was amazing also. And that's another one of my favorite memories. Because the fans who did travel for that, you could tell how much it meant to them. I've got a picture on my phone. Still, we had a group of Taiwanese fans down in front of us who were celebrating, and I just yelled out congratulations to them. And they turned around, and I saw that they were all crying. And that, to see a sporting event mean that much to people, that's just like the height of the human experience to me. Um, so many of my favorite memories are tied up with Taiwanese baseball because I've done so many games over there. Yu Chang's home run in the game against the Netherlands in 2023, which I'm sorry to bring up, obviously, but
Derek West in high leverage on no rest. Hensley Mullen should be tried at The Hague.
that moment was uh, as electric of a sports experience as I've ever felt. And I still, remember my mental process going through that call pretty vividly. Um, and to have something stick in your head that way, that doesn't really leave you as a broadcaster. One of my favorite moments, and I always used to go back to this moment as being my favorite, um, was back in the 2017 U18 Baseball World Cup. And it's a game that, I think if I was not continually bringing it up, it would be forgotten to most people because it was an otherwise relatively unremarkable game. But
Was
the
that
U.S.
Thunder
Thunder
Bay?
Bay, yes. Thunder
Okay,
Bay,
I
Ontario.
only remember it because Ryan Weathers in the USA beat
Yes.
Japan despite striking
Yes.
out like 25 times against
Yep.
Japan somehow.
And that was
Also,
like every USA baseball game that it felt like, they were going to strike out a lot, but they were also just going to crush. And you look up and down that roster and the amount of, I think they ended up having like 13 first round guys on that roster or something insane like that. But, Tristan Casas was on that roster, Nolan Gorman, Jared Kelenic, Matthew Libertor, Kumar Rocker, who of course now is in the big leagues, Bryce Terang, Ryan Weathers, you pointed out. I mean, they were loaded. Um, and there was a game that they played against South Africa. And you would think, and we thought going in, South Africa had lost the previous day, something like 22-2 to the Netherlands. And, it was just, again, it was early days, and South Africa was, they had to travel the farthest of anybody to get there. They looked exhausted. They just looked overwhelmed. And they threw out this little 5'7", 130-pound lefty named Mohamed Alo, and he ended up taking the loss. But I have never seen a gutsier performance by an athlete in my life. A kid who, maybe gets to pitch in a dozen games a year in a good year, went out against a lineup full of future first rounders and major leaguers and just baffled those guys through a complete game. He ended up taking the loss because his team just didn't get the bats going. And, somewhat understandably, you're facing a pitching staff like that. But to see someone like Mohamed Alo, a kid who grew up in a township, was going through some family issues at that time. I've never felt the need to go after a game and introduce myself to a player just to say that I admired what they did, but I did after that game. And that kid, he and I are Instagram friends to this day. No other sport in the world does that happen, where a 5'7", 130-pound kid can go out and stifle dudes who are going to be in the big leagues in the next 4 to 5 years. You can't do that on a football field. You can't do that in basketball. You can't do that in hockey, but you can do that in baseball. And that's one of the things that I love most about it. And that moment I'll never forget watching something like that, because that was as good of a baseball moment as I've ever seen. The US guys to all go congratulate him and talk to him after the game. That was one of the most amazing baseball moments that I've seen in my career.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm definitely gonna have to go find the highlights for that, see if I can find the full game VOD because that's just incredible. How can you not be romantic about baseball? I just feel like there's so many times where like you get all these like really obscure international guys and like no one really cares about them because like they're not making top 100 prospect lists or whatever, but like you still follow them, you watch their videos and like you're the one person rooting for them, it feels like, besides their family sometimes. Like that's me with like Ore Franson from the Netherlands. Like there's no like he was terrible, like quite frankly pretty terrible for a couple of years there, and he really locked in last year at high A, and now he's in double A shoving so far, knock on wood. He was a spring breakout and fall league guy, and just to see like what when they do have like success like that, you're like, I always knew it. I knew it, man.
And I like the way that you put it, that you're kind of the only person who might be rooting for them outside of their families. And, as broadcasters, we're supposed to be, for our network broadcasts, our WBSC or the World Baseball Classic or whatever it is, we're neutral observers. We're down the line. But I think, can pull for the human condition in a situation where you see somebody, like a Muhammad Allo, or to be honest, when you have a circumstance like we did in the qualifier in Taiwan, where you've got a player who makes multiple errors and is crying on the field, and your heart breaks for that person. Like, I think you can feel the humanity of a moment and be moved by that while also still trying to convey things in a neutral sense. But you do very much feel that you are a person who has the ability to tell the stories of somebody like a Muhammad Allo or somebody like a Wander Encarnacion, and do it knowing that this is an important moment for their family. This is an important moment for their future kids. This is an important moment for them. And you want to be someone who can give a voice to that in a way that enhances the meaningful nature of those moments. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like for me, I got really annoyed when I saw people like posting about Spain. Oh, they only have one Spanish-born person on the roster, which to some extent I was there with them. There were absolutely Spanish-born players who should have been there over some of the guys they roster. Like Mark Savit, like Spanish baseball royalty, born, raised in Spain, one of the best relievers in the Italian Series A. They only had one other left-handed pitcher on the team. He should have been there. Why was he not there? I don't know. But like a Wander Encarnacion, yes, he was born in the Dominican, but he immigrated to Spain. He grew up in Spain playing
Yeah,
baseball.
when he was like 12 years old. Like, it's not as though he's, was a mercenary who was playing somewhere else until he was 30 and decided, all right, I'll go take a flyer and play in Spain for a year. He's been committed, and I mean, played a year in Italy and said, I don't really enjoy it as much here. I want to go back to Spain and help build the game there. I had guys, and I mentioned this on the broadcast several times. I had a scout from a KBO team hit me up and say, hey, what else do you know about this Wander Encarnacion? Because he's really good. And I feel like there should be a lot more eyes on him than there are. That's a guy who's really committed to wanting to build up baseball in Spain. And I don't know. I mean, if a KBO team contacts him, I'm not sure if Wander Encarnacion takes that route, because he is so interested in the future of baseball and the place that he lives in and loves. So yeah, I think it's very easy for armchair observers to look at the classic and find things to be cynical about. There are so many more gray areas to all of this than just, oh, well, this guy was born in Venezuela, why is he on the Spain roster? It's not that simple a lot of these times. And there are so many really good and really interesting storylines that come from those players.
Yeah, no mercenary would react like that upon botching two consecutive
Right.
plays like that. No,
Right.
no, yeah, no one who is purely there because of some like great grandpa or something would react like that. there's just so many great stories like that. I love to highlight Dominic Scheffler, the Schlingen Schweitzer, for a Swiss born and raised player in minor league baseball above the rookie ball level. Absolutely shoved in his debut in Daytona for the Reds affiliate. There's a documentary about him. You can turn on like the auto captions in English. It works fine. Like he's a guy who like you really feel for because like he lost his grandpa who was like someone who was watching him and rooting for him. And, he's long distance with his girlfriend who's going to nursing school in Europe. And, he's all by himself in this very different, even things like mobility in America. Like you have to have a car when you're living in Florida. Like you can't take public transit everywhere like you can in Europe. Like, that's a big deal to adjust to for a lot of players. And like, it's really hard to not root for those guys and be, outside of, like really crazy deep prospecting pundits and their families, like maybe you're the only guy who cares, but you kind of have to care because no one else does, right?
And because their stories are, again, their stories are so human. And we're in this era of, discourse about immigration and all of it, and we're not going to go into all of that. But, these are guys who are chasing a dream across the globe as teenagers. And if that is not bravery, I don't know what bravery consists of. To be 16, 17 years old and to go from a place to somewhere completely different, whether it's culturally or language wise, or, even just to be 17 years old and be working a professional level job with the hours that a professional baseball player works, with the things that are required of that. That's extraordinarily difficult, even if you're just a kid from Billings, Montana. I mean, that's a really difficult thing to do. And then to ask kids to do it who don't speak the language, who have not been raised maybe in the structure of a professional organization. A kid who has played travel ball in the US is a lot more adaptable to the rigors of traveling as a professional player than somebody who grew up playing in a non-traditional baseball place. If you're playing in the club ball system in South Africa or in Australia, your longest road trip, quote unquote, is probably a 30-minute drive, across town to play a Saturday doubleheader. And so, yeah, those stories are so human and they reflect so much of what is supposed to be good about being able to chase those dreams and being good about a multicultural society and a global world. And so, yeah, that's a lot of those things that I admire most about those players are because of those things in their storylines, and not, oh, this guy can hit 96, or this guy, has plus power, or he's a plus runner. The stuff that's most interesting to me is this guy left home, and you mentioned Dominic Scheffler. I'm pretty sure that he moved to Japan and played when he was in high school. So, doing that, it's one thing to move, from Zurich to the, Grapefruit League and be able to speak English and kind of navigate your way there, to go to Japan and do like that's incredible. And so those stories to me are just, that highlights the ultimate in what you could ever dream of for someone who wants to chase down the thing that they long to do in life.
Yeah, exactly. All that once was good and could be good again. Not to get too romantic. And I don't feel like it's a coincidence that Dominic Scheffler wears R.A. Franson's Tortugas number 21. I feel like that's probably not a coincidence. But let's before I let you go, I have a couple of rapid fire questions I want to go through and hear your thoughts to them. So, first of all, who is your favorite player to watch in international baseball competitions?
Um, Man, that is a good question. You mean like all time, or favorite player that I have called games for?
All time.
Oh man. I mean, it is difficult to not go Shohei Ohtani. But that's way too easy of a, I'll tell you, one of my favorite players who I have ever watched is on the women's baseball side, and she was a shortstop for the U.S. national team named Jade Gortares. And Jade Gortaras is as fun of an athlete, especially defensively in the field. She is as smooth of a defensive baseball player as I have ever seen in my entire life. She's been, sort of on and off with the U.S. women's national team roster, but she's going to be one of the talent evaluators and coaches, I believe. I hope she plays, but she's going to be in the WPBL, the Women's Professional Baseball League, that's coming about, I believe, starting in 2026. They're holding tryouts this year. She's going to be on hand as one of the talent evaluators for the tryouts. She's one of my all-time favorites. The Women's Baseball World Cups that I've done, whenever I've had the chance to call a game with her on the field, she is almost distracting in a way that you hope the ball gets hit to her just so you can watch her range, so you can watch how she fields a ball, to the backhand side in the hole, how she makes a throw across the diamond. She's a blast to watch. That 2017 U18 Baseball World Cup was full of so much talent. Kotaro Kiyomiya, who is now finally kind of arriving in Nippon
Yeah.
professional baseball with the fighters, the Nippon Ham
Yes.
Fighters. A guy who he was sort of the Rintaro Sasaki before Rintaro Sasaki. He set the Japanese high school home run record, and people thought, oh, well, he's going to just jump in and be the guy immediately. And it didn't really go that way. I think, just now is still only 26, and he started to find it in NPB play. He's been super fun to watch over the course of his career. Yeah, it's cool because you get eyes on these guys long before you ever hear about them in the professional ranks, and you get to watch them throughout their growth as athletes. And those are a couple that have stood out for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting seeing like, how non-linear development is. For every Roki Sasaki, there's a Yasunobu Okugawa. For every R.A. Franson, or I guess Sem Robersa, there's a Daryl Collins. Um, yeah, it's great. I'm glad I'm really happy that you brought up women's baseball. It's definitely an undermentioned, undercovered like
Yeah.
aspect of the game, and I'm super stoked to see the women's baseball, that the baseball league. Admittedly, I need to do better, like kind of considering it, looking at shouting it out. It's really cool seeing how many women and girls are getting into baseball in general, and Alyssa Nacken, shout out Sac State legend, Giants legend. I took some classes at Sac State. Let's say you probably know what I mean. So she was super cool to watch, and I think she went off to a different org, but loved her with the Giants. She's so cool, and we'll see how that develops a little bit. As previously mentioned, you are a big hat collector. I know who your favorite hat, like your favorite international program hat is. So this question is, what are your top three ranked international program hats?
Oh man. The Netherlands is definitely number one. That was the one you were
Yeah.
alluding to. Um, Australia would be in that group. And man, that is a great question. It's interesting because so many of these teams, like you look at Korea's hats, for example, and it feels like they change every iteration of a new international event. I think the DR's interlocking logo is just very classic. They didn't try to do too much with it, to borrow a cheesy baseball phrase. It's just a very
Yeah.
classic looking lid, which I think is awesome for a country that is going to have a ton of people wearing that hat around the world. I think it's very cool that they went with something so classic. I am on record as being a downer on USA Baseball's look. I think they need an entirely new visual package, but I'll
I
throw out a
agree.
third one for you. I love Mexico's hats. I think Mexico, and they've gone through some different looks, but I feel like Mexico's look is always really, really solid. So I'm gonna pick Mexico as my third.
Yeah, it's a really unique one, and I feel like I see that Mexico hat in the wild a
Yeah,
lot.
that's another one that you see a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like what WBC hats I've seen in the wild. In the Bay Area when I was home, I saw a Korea one day when I was in
Okay.
Daly City. I was like, just pointing at the guy. I was like, oh my God, I love your hat. Yeah, I'm not sure who my top three would be. The Netherlands would definitely be top three. I haven't really given it that much thought, if I'm being honest.
New Zealand's redesign in 2022 was great
Oh yeah.
also. Theirs was really, really good. It's been very cool to see how different teams in different countries have realized sort of, all right, we need to step up our game with this because it's an avenue, to bring in some money and to sell some
Yeah, yeah.
merchandise. And yeah, so there are just so many, that um Panama's I think is good. Germany's
Oh
I think
yeah.
is good. And
Panama's
then
I think Panama's like look overall is like super
yeah,
underrated.
really
Much like
solid.
Panama as a team, I feel like kind of just
Yes.
always underrated.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's two different Germany hats. There's like the new one which they don't wear, and then the old one which they still wear with the new uniforms. I don't really understand what they're doing there. Um, although the new helmets had the new D on it, so
Right, right.
I don't get it. I really like Spain's uniforms. I know some people are like, it's like why is it like so 2000s futuristic? But I don't know. There's something about it I really like
I like
as
it.
well. Yeah. On to the next question. In the next 5 to 10 years, which national programs do you think are going to be the biggest risers in the world?
Man, that is a fantastic question. I mean, I do think that there is a reason that European baseball is kind of having a moment right now. I think so many federations, I don't want to say saw what the Czech Republic did and they're trying to emulate that because I think a lot of other federations were doing that already. But you mentioned France a little while ago. The fact that France has so many players who are playing collegiate baseball in the United States, their league has gotten so much better. That to me was, I think, the most underrated team of the 2022 qualifiers that we did. They made a few too many mistakes. They didn't get a whole ton of offense going, but the defensive work of that France team, they pitched. They had a lot of stuff that they could really, really build on. So I think, France could be one. Great Britain, I do think, is going to have a really good structure going forward for baseball just because of the visibility and the funding that came along with being back in the Classic automatically for 2026 and not having to go through the qualifiers again. So those countries, I think, are primed. And then I think it's going to be interesting to continue to watch, Pakistan made this big push after the 2022 qualifiers to start finding more players who had the ability to play for them in smaller level baseball competition, whether it's the West Asian Cup or different qualifiers. They're going to play in the qualifiers for U18s. That is a very, very small but very, very passionate baseball community. I don't know if that is going to be enough. There's always the risk in countries that have such small baseball communities that if you lose one or two key pieces of that equation, the rest of it sort of falls apart. But that is an area of the globe that obviously is very untapped and what it could bring for baseball's talent and baseball's future. And as weird as this is to say, I do think that Australia is really primed for taking some big steps to go from being maybe a third tier baseball power into being a second tier baseball power. I don't think they're going to be, Japan or Chinese Taipei or the US anytime soon. But if they can get on the same footing as, let's say, a Venezuela or Korea these days, when you have somebody like Travis Bazzana, who is a figurehead for all of the rest of your talent and who has put the international game so front and center in who he is as a ball player, that's huge. And Australia for so long has been, you know, uh, always a bridesmaid, never a bride in international competition. They could be a team that all of a sudden we look at as, oh, they're going to make a semifinal appearance in the Classic. They could upset Japan. They could do this. They could do that. That's a country that I think is very well positioned for the future.
Yeah, as I don't know if you've seen Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, but that 4-3 loss to Cuba every time.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
canon event. So
exactly.
hopefully Colombia and Puerto Rico keep Cuba from advancing, and then Australia comes out of that Tokyo pool with Japan, so they don't have to play them. Yeah. Okay. Next question. This is kind of tying into this. I please let me know if you can't like talk about this because it is kind of MLB business related. Which teams do you want to see return to the WBCQs in a few years, and or like what new teams do you want to like see for the first time in the WBCQs, assuming they either go back to the size they were before or get expanded if the tournament expands. I don't know. If it was me, like every single like team that's played like, I don't know, like a professional like in an actual competition for the past like 10 years would, be in the qualifier somehow. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because up to this point, obviously everything qualifier related has just been via invitation, right? So for MLB, they've looked at countries that have had baseball success, countries that have been in qualifiers or have been in classics before. Those teams have gotten invitations. What I think would be coolest, and this might be pie in the sky. There's obviously a lot of infrastructure and therefore a lot of cost that goes into this. But what I think would be coolest would be to have continental or regional qualifiers that lend themselves to being the events that select the teams for the classic qualifiers. So,
Mhm.
for example, if you get a European qualifier that features countries that, haven't made it in, whether it's Spain or Germany or whoever else, but you also put France in that equation and you put Switzerland and Austria and if there are teams that come out of the European Championships who have played their way into getting onto that stage, they should be rewarded for that. And so if there's, a team from Sweden that goes on a dream
Yep.
run and somehow places, in the top four, let's say in the European Championships, get that team to the WBC qualifier because that's a potential game-changing scenario for that entire federation. And I definitely understand why MLB has done it the way MLB has done it to this point. But that's the cool thing about where the classic is right now is I think it's made enough strides where we're getting to the point where you could do this. You could have an African qualifier where, in addition to South Africa, Uganda's got a team there, Zimbabwe's got a team there, these other countries that have started playing baseball, and if you can send an entrant that plays their way into the qualifier instead of just one that comes from a country selected because of its WBSC ranking or whatever it is, to me, that's the next step. And I think that would be very, very cool. To have Guam and New Zealand and Australia playing in an Oceania qualifier as they do for the U18s or U15s or U23s or whatever it is. That I think would be really, really neat. And I think we would get so many interesting storylines that come out of that because Cinderellas are going to pop up. And
Yeah.
when they do, there's going to be really cool stuff to talk about from there.
Yeah, exactly. Let them play, let
Yeah.
them get eliminated on the field before, they're cut for whatever, reason for from being invited.
Right. And,
You
I mean,
know,
I always explain it to people as if you were to go back to the FIFA World Cup in the 1950s, it's not the same event that it is nowadays. And these events have to grow over generations instead of over just years. But that's what MLB is, that we're a generation into the World Baseball Classic now. I mean,
yeah.
when the 2006 edition comes around, that's 20 years since the first one. And it's such a different event nowadays than it was for that first edition. And so that's good. And I think Major League Baseball has done a really good job having a long scope view of this thing and getting it to a point now where you can look at situations around the globe and think, all right, these teams all seem to be on the same footing. The European Championships are really quality baseball. What if we make them part of the structure of getting to the WBC? And I think that's a really neat next step concept.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. 2023 European Championships, Sweden finished above Italy.
Right,
Sweden beat up on Nicolo Panazzi, who was then affiliated for Italy. We aren't ready for that conversation yet, I guess,
right.
but like, I don't know, guys. That's pretty impressive.
And the more countries and the more athletes and the more fans you get into the pool, the more interested everybody else becomes. Because if you
Exactly.
are somebody who works for the FIBS in Italy, and all of a sudden you lose your WBC spot to a country like Sweden, then you redouble your efforts to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so those are the things that to me, it's a lot of the USA basketball conversation where when things went south for USA basketball, they reevaluated the entire um, method of how they went about succeeding in international events, and they've been more successful because of it. And sometimes that is that the fire purifying the gold sort of situation that you look for from some of these other federations.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, next rapid fire question. If you could have a signed national team jersey of any player from any time, who would it be and why?
Adam Jones, 2017 U.S. WBC squad, because his catch in San Diego to rob Manny Machado, to me, is the moment that saved the World Baseball Classic. And, I know that there was never any sort of official indication that the Classic was going away. But if Adam Jones doesn't make that catch, and again, you talk about these canon moments, if Adam Jones doesn't make that catch, and let's say the U.S. goes on to lose that game, they don't make it to the Final Four in Los Angeles, they don't win the 17 Classic, COVID comes around and delays the 2021 Classic. I don't know if we see the Classic again. It's possible that we still do. MLB had committed to it. They said that there was going to be one in 2021, but the economic picture was very, very different after the Adam Jones catch than it was before. And to me, that is and I said this to Adam in our broadcast in Regensburg a few years ago when he was in the booth with me and Ryan. That was the Joe Namath guaranteeing victory in Super Bowl III moment for the Classic, where it put a stamp on an event that was searching for an identity and then all of a sudden found one. And since then, it's taken off like a rocket. To me, that's the most important moment in the history of the Classic, right on par with Shohei Ohtani against Mike Trout. I think Ohtani against Trout does not happen if not for Adam Jones and Manny Machado.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, definitely great jersey pick. Amazing, like top three WBC moments for sure. I Shohei's a Dodger as a Giants fan. I probably couldn't say, Shohei Ohtani signed Japan jersey, so I would probably go with 2006 signed Chiron Martis jersey.
That's pretty
Uh,
good. That's a pretty good pick
no
too.
no hitter. I
The
talked to
lone no hitter in Classic history.
yeah, I do you know Greg Kreindler, the guy who does all
I
like the
do.
the paintings? I
Yeah.
was like, I was in a Q&A with him one like he did a live Q&A and it's like, are you ever gonna do like WBC paintings? Like you should do one of Chiron Martis, like what was he, 16, 17-year-old
Yeah.
no hitter over 7 innings? Like that's kind of like one of the biggest I'm him performances in WBC moments in WBC history, I think.
What did Greg
Um,
say?
he was like, "Yeah, there's some WBC moments I want to paint, but I need to
That's
research
cool.
it more, and I'm super busy. Like, my wait list is like 20 years long." And I was
I can
like,
believe that.
"What?" Yeah. Okay, just two more questions here. Last one, WBC related. This one, if you can't answer this one, I'll understand it
Okay.
uh, because of neutrality. But who's winning the 2026 WBC and who's tournament MVP?
Man. Amazing question. I'll give you the favorites and I think the dark horses. And yeah, out of my binding neutrality. No.
Yes.
I think the favorites are, obviously the Japans, the US's, the Dominican Republic. But I think beyond those, I do think that Chinese Taipei has a chance to make a deep run. And that is something that team has made it to the second round before, but they've never reached the semifinals. They've obviously never won a classic. They are in the midst of this golden age of baseball in Taiwan. And that sounds kind of weird to pick them as a quote unquote wild card because they are such a baseball powerhouse, but they've been really underwhelming in the classic. And even just to have to go through the qualifiers, was kind of a gut punch for them because they finished with the same record as everybody else in their pool in
Yeah.
2023. But because the runs that they had allowed, they end up going through the qualifying structure. And to be at this point now, where you do have that Premier 12 winning team from November and this WBCQ team from February that was able to survive, you do now have those two full rosters of, a baseball crazy place that produces extremely good talent, and you have a talent base to draw from that has exposure on the highest levels of the international game now. There's not a lot of other countries that can say that at this stage. So they strike me as somebody who could really make a run. I think Colombia and Panama are going to be really well positioned in Pool A because I think out of that group, Puerto Rico obviously is going to be a bear, but I don't necessarily think that Cuba or Canada are clear cut as the second best teams in that group over Colombia
Mhm.
or Panama. I think Colombia could be the second best team in that group, and has the ability to spring an upset over Puerto Rico. So yeah, I mean, if I had to go with a wild pick, I think it would be great to see Australia or Czechia go on a run. A couple of countries that are playing in places where they have these bizarrely large fan bases in Tokyo because of what they've done and what they've accomplished in Tokyo in recent years. It's so cool to see how the fans turn up cheering for Czechia or Australia in games in which they're not playing against Japan. So they've got the ability to potentially do some damage there. But yeah, I mean, it's the favorites are still the favorites for a reason. There is just so much more talent on the top tier for those countries. But as teams have shown, there always seems to be that one team storyline. Whether it was Mexico in 2023, or the Netherlands obviously making it to the semis in 2013. There are those teams that gel at the right time. They play their best ball in the most crucial moments through those first and second rounds, and they can go on a run. And it doesn't feel like there is a team this year that you look at and think, well, there's no chance that that team's got a shot. There are guys who I think have the ability on each of these rosters, on each of these pitching staffs, to go out and shut down a really good lineup. And so there's kind of those first tier teams, and then it feels like almost everybody is on that second tier, which is very cool for an event that's predicated on teams being able to potentially jump up and surprise you.
Yeah, yeah. So if I forced you to make a prediction for the two, who would it be, sir? Unless you can't say it.
Um, let's see. I'm gonna predict a Dominican Republic champion and Juan Soto as the MVP. And I know that's very much like a 2025 men's basketball Final Four bracket, and that it's all chalk. But for the DR to have not made it out of the first round in 23, and for Soto to be the guy who he is right now, playing in the biggest market, being somebody who was so heavily focused on for the last couple of years in his career. I think he's just ready for the moment. I mean, he showed us when he was 19 that he's ready for the moment. But that is a squad that as soon as they realized in 2023 that they were not making it out of the first round, you could tell that Nelson Cruz and the entire apparatus of baseball in the DR was like, we got to figure out how to never let this happen again. So they are going to be a force next year.
Yeah, Puerto Rico wanted them back in the Puerto Rico pool so they
Yeah.
could beat them again, but MLB was like, can't have that. We
We're
got
going
to
to
keep
keep
you
these
guys
separate.
separate. Yeah.
But I mean,
Uh,
imagine if you get that as a semifinal matchup or a
oof.
championship matchup. I mean, that the level of electricity in that ballpark in Miami would be off the charts.
I still give it to Team Rubio. They just play different. But like you said, like team like Taiwan, like they even have guys who haven't played for them in the qualifiers of the Premium 12, like Sung Chae Chin wasn't
Right,
there. Like
right.
Hao Yu Lee, he's a legit guy, like middle
Yep.
infield, big bat. Like he wasn't there. If they got a Corbin Carroll, like
Yeah.
I'm not a sports bettor, but like if I was a like if I bet money on sports, like if I saw Corbin Carroll on Taiwan, I would be like, Team Taiwan wins.
Yeah.
Corbin
That
Carroll
team is
MVP
scary.
sprinkle. Yeah,
They're
that'd be
really
scary.
scary. Yeah.
My friend Yaku Cosmopolitan Yuri picked like honestly, he was like, yeah, it's just gonna be a dice case situation. Japan wins again. Otani's MVP again. Which, yeah, I mean,
It's possible.
if I was forced to make a bet, like if you're like, oh, we're gonna kidnap your dog if you don't make a bet, like I'd probably make
Yeah.
that bet.
That's the odds on one. But, I mean, it could just as easily be the US winning and Bryce Harper being MVP. I
Or
mean, it's obviously going to depend on what these rosters look like in total, but that's the thing that I love most about the Classic is that it is an event in which now, thankfully, each team is a legit who's who. If you could select the best possible rosters for every country, we are getting those rosters nowadays, which was
Yeah.
not the case in 2006 or 2009. And that to me is a sign of how far this event has come.
Yeah. Paul Skeens MVP.
Yeah, that could be very cool.
Yeah. For me, my prediction, just to be a little bit different, was Puerto Rico winners and
Okay.
San Francisco Giants legend Elliot Lemuel Ramos LeBron as
Wow.
MVP.
I
I mean,
like
he's
that pick.
one of his last names is literally LeBron. He's the GOAT. So
LeBron.
yeah, that's not a joke. Um, all right, last question before I let you go. Mr. Mon, what advice do you have for people looking to get into sports broadcasting?
Man, I would never take it back. And I mean that in a form of advice thusly. I think there is a lot of cynicism in the world of sports broadcasting, and we all fall victim to it. Everybody has their moment where they think, "Oh, that guy's son got that job because of his connection there, and that's really frustrating. And why am I not getting these opportunities? And why is this not working the way that I thought it would? And why did I say the name incorrectly on this home run call? Or why did I clear my throat when we came back from break?" There are things that you can just constantly pick at and beat yourself up over and get jaded by the industry with. But I always go back to a thing that my best friend, my first year in minor league baseball, would say to me when we, would work a game that had been rain delayed and we didn't get out of the ballpark until 11:45 and you didn't get home until 12:30 and then you had to be back at 7 to pull the tarp off the field or whatever it was. And when my buddy Brendan would see that I was having a rough morning, he would come up to me and say, "Hey man, it beats working at a bank." And to me, that was always the reminder of, and nothing against anybody who's working at a bank, but it was always the reminder of being grateful and being present in doing something that you love. Because the worst day, as cheesy as it is, the worst day doing this job is still better than any day I could conceive of doing anything else. And if you know that you love it and you know that it's something that you want to do, um, as basic of advice as that is just to go for it because you don't want to look back. I'll be turning 40 this summer. If I were on the verge of this birthday and thinking to myself, man, why didn't I take that job in Australia when I was 24? Why didn't I move to South Carolina when I was 21? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? I would not be a person who could look at myself in the mirror and think I had gone for what I really wanted to go for. And, it's not to put myself on the same plane as the guys we were talking about earlier who, pack up and move across the globe in order to chase something that they want to do in a country where they don't speak the language and in a place where they're not comfortable culturally or whatever it is. But there is something to be said for finding something that you love and going for it because there is no substitute for that. The more practical advice that I think I would give is to learn as much about the industry in every different format as you can. When I got into broadcasting, my first job was working on the production side, and I'm so grateful nowadays that I had all of that work, whether it was editing audio, writing scripts for commercials, running the board for live events, doing news updates, all that type of stuff you learn and it helps you down the road in various ways because you know that if you have to write a commercial spot for a lawn care company in Denver, Colorado, you have the structure in your brain of this is what that process takes. I know how to do that now. So if I go and I work for a minor league organization and I have to write a commercial for a restaurant in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, I still know what I'm doing because I learned that process before. If I have to cut this audio to run these clips from this press conference during this radio show, I can probably cut audio and mix it to if I was going to host a podcast later on, which I've done now for a decade for minor league baseball. it also, I think, helps in the way people talk about, everyone should have to work at a restaurant at some point in their
Yeah.
lives, which I actually never have. But it's because of the same concept of that it's not easy when you have been on that side of it. And so when you're the jerk who's getting upset that like your dish came out 5 minutes late, you don't have the experience in your life to realize like, oh yeah, it's because there's a lot going on back there, and it's not as simple as it looks. I've had situations where during broadcasts, our line has dropped or somebody mistakenly fired something on the board and it played audio over one of our segments or whatever. I'm not going to get mad at a board op or a producer for that because I know that's not as easy back there as you just assume it is. And so learning all those different aspects and getting a feel for what the industry is like in every way just makes you so much more well-rounded of a person working in media. Everybody wants to go out and get a job doing a professional team, doing a big four team, doing whatever right out of the gates. It's not going to happen for most of us. And when you are able to, again, sort of draw these elements out of all the different experiences that you've had, you look back years down the road and think, oh man, I would be so lost doing this if it wasn't for this that I did 10 years ago. And that to me is one of the most important things that I think I was ever able to do in my career was just through osmosis, just try to soak up as much as I could in all these different areas. And it seems like it served me pretty well to be somebody who, at various times in my career, I've been a writer and a reporter. I've been an audio producer. I've been a graphic designer. I've been a play-by-play guy. Like it's all of that stuff feeds the same organism in some way or another, and it all seems to help in some way or another. Back when I was writing for MLB.com, the way that I would choose my word usage as a writer was different from how I would choose it as a broadcaster. And those two things I think fed into each other differently over that time. And so again, it all goes back to if you have the enthusiasm for it, there is something very cool about having the opportunity to do all of those things instead of having the obligation to do all of those things. And that's a really lucky way to feel in life that every day getting to do something you love is an opportunity and it's not something that you're being forced to do. And it's something that I've been really, really lucky to get a chance to do for 18 years now.
That's awesome advice. Thank you. That's really just wisdom beyond my years, far beyond my years. And I do connect a little bit with it with my day job. It's, my worst days at my job are better days than I could hope to have in pretty much any other job. And, frequently things are not super fun, but like you just gotta remind yourself that like this is what you want to
Yeah.
do and be grateful for it because there's so many other people who would want to be in your position and who can't for one reason or another. But yeah.
Absolutely, man. And that, I think that's a very healthy way to look at it too, because I had a buddy who used to work in broadcasting and now is doing a different job. And we were kind of talking last year about some of the stuff that I do and, just telling him about some of the college work that I've done and the MLB network stuff and how you try to stitch it all together and make some semblance of a living out of it, which can be stressful as a freelancer. And he said, hey man, you got to do it for the rest of us who can't do it anymore,
Yeah.
because he gave up and got a quote unquote real job. And you do think about that you take those people with you along for that ride as well. And that's an important thing too. And you feel that support from people like that. And that's really amazing if you can hang in and keep doing it and it's still making you happy. And, in my case, if your wife still doesn't want to kill you, then that's a positive, and you just try to keep rolling with that for as long as you can.
I remember you posted on your story, or was it like you got your family stuff like with the lighting feature for your wedding, I think?
Yes,
I could be
yes.
wrong. That was awesome to see. All right. Well, Tyler, thank you so, so much for your time. This
Jacob,
was
this is a
awesome.
blast, man. Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
No, no problem. Every second of it, I loved it. Thank you so much. Why don't you let the people who watch my show know where they can find you and find your projects? Because I know, like you said, you do minor league podcasting and you write
Yeah.
about prospects and stuff.
Yeah, this time of year, that's kind of probably the place to find me most. I host the official podcast of minor league baseball, the show before the show, which you can find anywhere and everywhere you find your podcast. You can find us at MLB Pipeline, MLB.com/pipeline, or at MILB.com, the minor league baseball site. Yeah, I've got more international stuff coming up over the summer. I'll be at that U18 Baseball World Cup in Okinawa coming up in September. I'll be there for that, which I'm very excited for. Another part of the world I've never been to. Hopefully, some more MLB Network stuff coming up in the coming months. Yeah, I'm no longer on X, Twitter, but I am on Blue Sky these days at Tyler Maun, Maun, and I'm on Instagram at Tyler Maun PXP. You can find my work there. And yeah, man, this was a blast, Jacob. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much for coming on once again. I love to go out to Okinawa for that U18 tournament because my girlfriend's Japanese. She moved back to Japan, so be an easy way to, you
Yeah.
know, spend some time with her. But I also kind of want to go to the European Championships, and with my work, it's hard to get time off. So we'll see. I might have to pick and choose because I also want to go to the WBC. I think I'm going to try to go to the Puerto Rico pool because
Awesome.
I have friends from Puerto Rico, like my housemates from Puerto Rico. I have a bunch of Puerto Rican friends through him and work. So, we'll all probably go blonde and, scream our lungs out supporting Puerto Rico. Even if I can't be with the Netherlands in person, I'd be with them in spirit.
That is fantastic.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. People, check out Tyler Mon. He's incredible. I can't wait to hear the games he calls in the future for the U18 World Cup in Okinawa and surely the 2026 World Baseball Classic. Have a nice day. See ya.